Hello and welcome to this week's review on My Hero Academia. We're back with a brand new episode for a brand new series, and we'll start off, as we often do with these reviews, by starting out with the positives. Now, just two little things I want to say in the here and now. Firstly, if you have read ahead in the manga and you know what kind of events are coming down the pipeline, please don't spoil it for your fellow fans of the series, because let's be honest, when it comes to this series, there's a hell of a lot of spoilers out there, and I will be blunt, I've had pretty much every major plot point from at least the rest of this season spoilt for me, so please don't do that for everyone else. And the second thing, and I think this is one that a lot of people are going to be wanting to know, is that this episode is not a filler episode. Much like the debut episode of the previous season, we're going directly into the action. Though I will admit, there was a moment towards the start of this episode where I did worry that this was going to become a filler thing, but we'll discuss that in just a couple moments' time. So we'll just say, as far as the headline positives is concerned, I think that this was a fantastic way to kick off a new series. I don't think it was the perfect way, but I'll discuss that as we go through the review. But I do think that it did everything that it needed to, as far as getting us acclimatised and brought back into the feel of things. I think that the main action sequence we get towards the end of the episode is fantastic, but more on that later on. To kind of taking this in a little bit more of a linear fashion, because I will admit I'm doing this review slightly differently. I've just got a bunch of notes in front of me rather than more of a scripted thing, which is what I've been doing for the past 6 months or so with my reviews of Vigilantes. But I will say is that, as I mentioned towards the start of this review, I think that the way this episode helps to set the stage for the coming series is good. I think it helps to help us get back into the feel and the swing of things as far as where we are with the main story as it is. I think it does that very well. We get this neat little opening sequence with just Midoriya just trying to find some sense of normality through all the chaos and destruction and insanity that's unfolding around him. He's doing laundry. He's trying to deal with the tattered remains of his hero costume. And I think that's a neat moment, that sense of trying to ground himself after everything that's gone on over the past season or so. Particularly all the dark Deku stuff that happened in the previous season, or however it is you want to refer to that character. And I think it does that stuff well for what it is. Whilst I do feel that we'll get a bit more of a deeper dive into Izuku Midoriya's mental state and where he finds himself at this point in the story later on in this season, particularly bearing in mind who the focus for the immediate term is going to be, I think that it is setting up for things in a decent way. And that's the main thrust of a lot of the things I have to say about this particular episode. It's a lot of setup, but at least there is some sense of payoff here for some things. This isn't like you have the first episode of a new story arc and it's just set up, and maybe a little bit of payoff for stuff that happened in the previous storyline, the previous season. There is some thrust here, there is some conclusion, well, not conclusionary stuff, but it does give us a sense of that we are moving on here and we're not just going, okay everyone, tune in for next week. I did enjoy much of what we saw towards the start of this episode, but like I said previously, there was a part of me that was worried that we might be getting into a bit of a filler episode, because we do have that brief flashback bit when Uraraka is giving her big impassioned speech, as she did a few episodes ago, about why they need to let Midoriya back in, why he's doing all of this, and why he's the bestest hero that ever did hero. And that was a great moment when we saw it. It is a nice reprise of it that we ended up getting, though there was a part of me that was worried that we're going to start getting into a clip show. But of course, recently we had a clip show, a little mini-series, which I didn't watch because I at least have a memory enough to know what happened in the previous few seasons. Of course, I did worry that when Midoriya did go down into the common area, that we were going to start getting into a bit of a filler episode, because it is that kind of setup where I just think someone's just going to turn around and say, okay everybody, let's play bingo! Bakugo, you can be the caller. I don't want to be the caller, that sounds lame. And just wacky shenanigans then unfold, kind of like the that card game OVA from last year. I could easily see something like that unfolding, but we didn't get that. It was just here's our cast of all these characters that you know and love. Maybe they'll do something over the course of this season, we'll soon see, but it's nice to see them, of course, see more of them, see them all doing things. We end up moving then into a bit of a discussion, well not a discussion, a monologue from All For One, as we learn out a better, or have a clearer idea as to what his major goal for this world and his big plan at the moment. His big idea is to just spread chaos across the world. He's built up connections to villain groups and criminal organisations all across the world, and now this is being used as all the chaos that's unfolding in Japan is being used as something of a signal to all of them to just go out and get busy, cause as much chaos and destruction as you can. All these various different villain organisations exist all across the world, even in some parts of the world are largely uninhabited or incredibly sparsely populated. Yeah, I think they probably should have done a little bit of research there, bearing in mind where some of these little blobs go. But hey, it's there for dramatic effect. It's there to show just how he's spreading his influence across the world, and almost like a virus, he's spreading this chaos so that he can enact his new world order. And that is interesting. I mean, it does help to build him to be more of a planetary threat rather than just one that's located to Japan. But it does feel like one of those things. It's a case of, okay, we're trying our best to make this seem like a bigger threat than he is. Not to diminish him, because he is a big threat, but it feels like a case of show. Well, it definitely is a case of tell, not show, and I'm not exactly keen on that. It would have been nice to maybe at some point in an episode you get a flash to something that's happening in Sydney, or something that's happening in Berlin, or Madrid, or London. You get these different villain groups crawling out of the woodwork in some kind of montage of just little snappy shots. That would have been neat. Maybe we'll get that as the season goes on, but we'll soon see about that. We do get a sense of this Hetramorph Rebellion that seems to be growing up and start to be developing, which I know a lot of people that read the manga were a little bit bummed out by the fact that that stuff hasn't really been touched upon all that much, really at all, within the anime itself. And I will admit that, while someone who hasn't read the manga, it does feel a little bit odd to just make that jump into this now. Like, it does make sense in the context of this series. It's not something that's coming totally out of left field, and it is something that has been touched upon in the previous seasons. It went during the... Yes, it was exactly in the previous season where we got it, even though it was supposed to be in the season before that, during the whole My Villain Academia stuff. So we had that established. I just don't think it's been established enough, so it does feel like we're going from 1 to 11 to stupid very, very quickly, that all of a sudden all these people with mutation quotes are now suddenly deciding we want rights and we want respects, and now the only way for us to get that is to burn the entire world to the ground, which... Okay, I think that stuff needed a bit more development, but it does feel as though that stuff is being pushed along by the remnants of the Metal Liberation Army. We do see Skeptic starting to just send these messages out, and I'm a little bit conflicted with that, not because of how it's executed, but it feels as though there's a bit of a... I don't know if it's lost in translation, and if it is lost in translation, it's not lost from Japanese to English, it's lost from mind to page, if you understand what I mean. That whole sequence of events gives the feeling that the Metal Liberation Army isn't truly gone, and they're just really seeing the Paranormal Liberation Army, or whatever, the Happy Tree Friends, or whatever Tomura's little supervillain group is now called. They're seeing them more as a means to an end, and they're just letting them go out, do the heavy work, cause the chaos of destruction, and then they'll take over for them in the aftermath at some point in the future, when they find someone that could go toe-to-toe with All For One, or All For Tomura, or whomever it might be that's ruling the world. Which is a bold strategy if they can pull it off. I don't think that they can do, but hey-ho, it does make them seem a little bit more of a continued threat, because, as I've said previously, I don't think the Metal Liberation Army as a group is one that you can really just defeat by walloping the leader squarely on the head and saying, right, situation's done and dusted, they're all going to prison, we never have to deal with these guys again. Those ideals, those principles that they preach and they've gone on about for years are still there, they still exist, and many of the people that have been... that we see in that montage seem to be echoing those talking points. So it'd be interesting to see exactly where all that goes, but there is a part of it that just feels it's existing for the sake of giving our villains more grunts to do the heavy lifting work, which I will admit I'm not entirely keen on, because I was horribly burnt with that when that's effectively what the Metal Liberation just boiled down into. Of course, I think it's time for us to talk about the big debut in this episode, the one that the internet is no doubt going nuts about, and certain sections of the fan base who didn't know this character's coming down the pipeline. Yes, it's time to talk about Star and Stripe, the #1 hero from America. By golly gee willikers, the internet's going to go nuts for her. I think that this is a great debut, as I mentioned way back when I did my review of the first movie, that this is the character that was going to come into focus. I didn't say it explicitly because, you know, I didn't want to give away spoilers, but I've known about this character for quite some time. She is the little girl that we see All Might save in that movie. We see some shots of it. Though, to be fair, there is a little bit of a difference in terms of continuity. In the movie, All Might saves her and her family when they're on holiday in Las Vegas. In the episode, it says that he saved them when they were on the way to Santa Monica Boulevard. Now, that might be the case. That might be where they were ending up, but that's not where they were at the time. They were explicitly in New Vegas. Not New Vegas, Las Vegas. Sorry, I've been playing a lot of Fallout stuff recently. But you get the idea. All Might saved her, and she was so inspired by him that she decided to become the American version of All Might, which leans into this theory or this theme, this undercurrent, this metatextual feel that I have, that maybe part of the subtext about My Hero Academia is more about the history of anime and animation, more so than it necessarily is about superheroes and superhero fiction, given the relationship between American animation and Japanese animation, how the two of them for decades have just been influencing one and the other, how when we go all the way back, and forgive me for getting the name of the guy, but the godfather of anime was heavily influenced by Disney, particularly the Carl Barks DuckTales comics, which then influenced the look of anime as we know it, and more recently, when anime really boomed in the West in the 1990s, you can now see that now with a lot of American and British television and comic books, which now are taking on a very more anime design and scope to it. So it feels like Star and Stripe is a manifestation of that Western animator who was influenced by anime, but they were influenced by someone who was influenced by American animation, which maybe I'll talk about in greater detail in a video at a not too distant future, but I think that they are a fascinating character with a great superpower. And just how we have that little moment where they talk about the nature of the power and how the American government have been studying it carefully to understand how it works, because of course they would! It's a superpower that lets the person using it do whatever they want within good reason. It's practically reality warping. Of course the American government want to know how that works, for goodness sake. What I will say is that, and this is something I can guarantee is going to end up coming up a lot over the next few weeks and months and years as this series goes on or is reflected upon, there's going to be a lot of debate as to whether or not she could have killed Tomura there and then, and there was a part of me that was thinking, okay, so why bother with just turning the air into getting rid of the air? Turn it into acid. Just say everything over there in that 100-meter space is now acid. That really nasty acid that burns through literally everything. Do that! The thing, as has been discussed in the episode, she can't do that. I don't think that she can change the chemical composition of something. She can just change the properties of it. So she could have just said, okay, everything over there in that star-shaped box, that's now true zero. It's minus 100 degrees Kelvin or something like that. Just really so cold anything in there can't exist. And that probably would work. Maybe, I don't know. I'm sure in the comment section down below, I'm going to be told whether or not that would work. So here's a little bit of a game for you, dear listener. Down in the comment section down below, suggest how you think that Star and Stripe could have defeated Tomura in that sequence. What could she have done using her quirk to defeat Tomura? No matter how silly, no matter how goofy, no matter how weird it might be, suggest it. Maybe keep it a little bit family friendly because, you know, we don't want YouTube breathing down our necks and causing us problems. But you get the idea. I think that they're an interesting character. I think they have an interesting superpower. And it'd be interesting to see exactly where they go with this. Like I said previously, I knew this character was going to come into the swing of things. And the big question for me with this episode was, are we just going to get straight into the action, or are we going to get a filler thing? Maybe if it wasn't for the fact that we're now into the final couple seasons of the series and the final few storylines of the manga, that if that hadn't been the case, maybe there would have been a cute little episode where they're showing her around Japan, showing around Tokyo, and because she's an American, Americans are loud, she ends up causing a few faux pas. I was going to make a rather nasty joke then, but I'm not going to. Anyway, with all that said and done, let us get into the negatives. And I don't really have many negatives. Though I will say is that, you know, the episode itself, it's in the nick of time, a big-time Maverick from the West. And, you know, anyone with even the basicest understanding of how geography works knows that the United States is to the east of Japan. So, you know, I have to say that whilst I understand that they're referring to the West in a geopolitical sense of the word, you know, to refer to it in a potentially geographical sense and it being incorrect, I think that's a very low mark, and it means that this series it's just mid, folks. It really is just mid, because they don't understand how maps work. But in seriousness, though, I will say is that the only issue, I only have 2 issues with the episode itself, and one of them is more on a meta thing, which I'll get into in a moment. But in the here and now, I do think that we're getting into stuff a little bit too quickly. Whilst I am glad that we didn't have a filler episode to start all this out, the fact that we are just going straight into this action sequence, brilliantly well put together or not, isn't something that really sits well with me. I would like to have spent more time with Midoriya and the others, getting a sense of where they are in this particular moment, as I think that in itself would have been more useful in the grand scheme of things, because it does feel as though we're probably not going to be seeing much of him for the next 4 or 5 episodes or so, possibly not for the next 13 or so, depending on where they want to do this whole Star and Stripe thing as this first half of the season, and then the second half being the thing that comes next, which I'm not going to refer to, but we'll soon see about all of that. The only other negative that I have, and again, I'm going to keep this short because this is not the series' fault, it's an issue that I have with Crunchyroll. Like, I watch this on Crunchyroll every day. I know that when there's an episode of My Hero Academia that I need to be up for 10:30 in the morning, because that's when the episode goes live on the platform. Maybe a little bit later, maybe a good 20 or 30 minutes later. But that wasn't the case. It wasn't released on Crunchyroll. I think it was released on Hulu beforehand. And for what I've seen, and this might just be a rumour, but apparently it's not going live in the UK on Crunchyroll till 5:30 in the evening. I don't even know where to begin with that without going to a big, dumb, stupid rant, but why is that the case? Why is it for almost every single episode that I watch this frigging series up until this moment, they've now decided, okay, we're going to change the time of the stuff that goes out, we're going to now change it to 5:30. Why? I mean, sure, maybe this is the time that you broadcast in Japan, but I'm not living in Japan. I don't gain anything from it being on at 5:30. Yes, you could argue that it's not really appropriate to broadcast something like this at 10:30 in the morning because of how rude and crude and violent it is. But it's an online thing. That stuff doesn't matter. Watershed times don't matter, but, you know, I'm going to get into a rant with it. I don't know why that is, mate. Hopefully this is a one-off thing, because otherwise it means I need to go via YouTube to find these episodes, and I don't want to do that, because I'm paying for Crunchyroll. I'm paying explicitly so I can see this stuff ahead of time, that I'm not having to make do with some awkwardly put-together thing on YouTube or elsewhere. But anyway, on to the overview itself, and I have to say that this episode was great. It was a lot of great fun. I think that the action sequence, which itself I've not really touched upon in a great degree, because, as I've said and as I've hinted to when I was talking about Vigilantes, there's only so many ways you could say it looks good, it's fantastic, it's well put together. I will admit that it is early days in it. I think that some of the more spectacular and visually bold things that we're going to get with that action sequence will be coming further down the pipeline with it. But from what we see here and now, I think that it is great. There is one slight animation blunder, though, that I did notice, which is that when you have the moment where you've got Alpha Tomura and then you've got Star and Stripe and they're both on the craft, or rather, Tomura is on the Nomu. When you see Star and Stripe, you can see the background moving behind her because she's moving forward. She's on a jet that's moving forward. You don't see that on Tomura. On Tomura, the background is still static. You still see some clouds moving, but the actual backdrop itself, further in the back, doesn't move at all. Small problem. Might be fixed by the time it goes out to Blu-ray, but still a little thing all the same. But still, this episode was great and fantastic. I think it really sets the tone for things going forward, and we really are just getting straight into it. No filler, no build-up, just pure into the action. Now, this will be the part in the video where I go to comment corner. However, the comments I've had recently have been to do with very specific videos, a very specific series, the What If series, and of course with my reviews on Vigilantes. I don't want to cover them here and now because they're not really topically appropriate, and the only stuff that I've really done as far as My Hero Academia is concerned is the review of the second movie, and for the review of the previous season about 6 months ago, or 12 months ago at this point, and I don't want to get into those here and now. But if you have any comments about this episode, maybe from the wacky shenanigans that Stars and Stripe could use to defeat Tomura, or alternatively, just your thoughts and feelings on this episode, let me know in the comment section down below, and you will be read at next week's show. But between then and now, thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! What could she have done using her quirk to defeat Tomura? Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!